In the heavy heat of a morning, a police officer drives his patrol car into a narrow alley where the silence seems too strange. As he rounds the corner, the dry sound of gunshots erupts from several points, closing off all escape routes. Trapped between worn-out walls, he tries to react with limited ammunition, but the pressure only increases. In the background, a neigh cuts through the air, announcing the arrival of a police horse, advancing on the encirclement. The criminals, surprised, reorganize their positions, their eyes also fixed on the animal. The officer sees the opening, but knows the net is still closing. The shots double, and the alley becomes a labyrinth of shadow and fire. And in the next instant, everything seems suspended in the air. Love stories with animals? Then subscribe now and don't miss any. Thank you for following us. Now back to our story. Officer Jake Mitchell adjusted his hat as the morning sun painted the desert landscape of Copper Valley, Arizona, in shades of gold and amber. The familiar creak of leather and the rhythmic clip-clop of his patrol horse, thunder beneath him, marked the beginning of what he expected to be another routine day patrolling the outskirts of town. The radio on his belt crackled with the usual morning chatter between dispatchers and units, a comforting soundtrack that had become second nature after 12 years on the force. Thunder's ears twitched forward as they navigated the dusty main road leading out of the residential area toward the older section of Copper Valley. Jake had specifically requested this route today, knowing that the upcoming town festival meant increased foot traffic in areas that typically saw little activity. The mounted patrol unit was particularly effective in these situations, providing both a visible police presence and the ability to navigate terrain that patrol cars couldn't access. As they rode past the weathered storefronts and adobe-style buildings that gave Copper Valley its distinctive character, Jake reflected on how much the town had changed since he first arrived as a rookie officer. What once was a sleepy desert community had gradually expanded, bringing with it both opportunities and challenges that required careful attention from law enforcement. The older sections, particularly the maze of narrow alleys behind the historic district, had become gathering spots for various groups, some harmless, others requiring more vigilant monitoring. Thunder snorted softly and shook his magnificent head, his dark mane catching the morning light. The horse was a magnificent animal, a quarter horse with the intelligence and training that made him an invaluable partner. Jake had worked with Thunder for over 3 years now, and their bond went far beyond the typical relationship between officer and mount. Thunder seemed to sense things that Jake missed, often alerting him to situations before they became apparent to human senses. The radio crackled to life, interrupting Jake's morning contemplation. Unit 7, this is dispatch. We have a report of suspicious activity in the area of Mesquite Alley behind the old hardware store. Caller reports seeing individuals gathering in groups and acting nervous. Can you investigate? Jake pressed the radio button clipped to his shirt. This is Unit 7, copy that. En route to Mesquite Alley, ETA approximately 10 minutes. Thunder's ears perked up at the sound of Jake's voice, and the horse seemed to sense the subtle change in their mission from routine patrol to active investigation. Jake guided his partner toward the older section of town, where narrow alleys wound between buildings that had stood since Copper Valley's founding in the early 1900s. These areas were like a different world compared to the modern developments on the town's periphery, with their close-quarters construction and limited visibility. As they approached the general area, Jake began to notice subtle signs that something was indeed unusual about this morning. The typical sounds of daily life seemed muted, and there were fewer people visible on the streets than normal for this time of day. Even Thunder seemed to sense the change, his step becoming more measured and his attention more focused on their surroundings. The call had come from Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, a long-time resident who lived in an apartment above the old bakery. She was known for being observant and reliable, not someone who would call in false alarms or let her imagination run wild. If Elena said something was suspicious, Jake had learned from experience that it warranted serious attention. Jake guided Thunder down a side street that would bring them to the entrance of Mesquite Alley from the east side. The area was a network of narrow passages that connected the backs of various businesses, created decades ago when the town's layout was more haphazard and less regulated by modern planning codes. During the day, these alleys were typically empty, except for delivery trucks and the occasional shortcut taken by locals who knew the area well. As they turned the corner onto the approach to Mesquite Alley, Jake noticed that Thunder's demeanor had shifted again. The horse's ears were constantly moving, swiveling to catch sounds that Jake couldn't hear, and there was a tension in Thunder's muscles that suggested the animal was preparing for something significant. Jake had learned to trust these signals completely. The morning air carried scents that seemed heavier than usual, a combination of dust, metal, and something else Jake couldn't immediately identify. The shadows between buildings seemed deeper and more concealing, and the typical ambient noise of a small town going about its daily business was notably absent in this particular area. Jake reached for his radio to check in with dispatch before proceeding into the alley system, but as his hand touched the device, Thunder suddenly stopped and raised his head high, nostrils flaring. The horse had detected something that demanded immediate attention, and Jake felt his own senses sharpen in response to his partner's alert. In the distance, barely audible, came the sound of voices speaking in low, urgent tones. The words were indistinguishable, but the tone suggested secrecy and tension. Jake dismounted carefully, keeping Thunder's reins in his left hand while positioning himself to get a better view of the alley entrance. What he saw made his stomach tighten with concern. There were indeed several individuals gathered in the narrow space between buildings, but their positioning and behavior suggested something far more organized than the casual gathering described. In the initial call, they seemed to be positioned strategically, with some individuals near the entrance points and others deeper within the alley system. Their clothing was nondescript, but practical, and their movements suggested they were waiting for something or someone specific. Jake remounted Thunder and backed away from the direct line of sight to the alley. His years of training and experience told him that this was not a situation to handle alone, and he reached for his radio to call for backup before proceeding. The smart approach would be to establish a perimeter and wait for additional units to arrive before attempting any direct contact or investigation. But as Jake pressed the button on his radio, nothing happened. He tried again, adjusting the volume and checking the antenna. Still nothing. The radio was completely silent, not even producing the static that indicated a working but poor connection. In all his years of service, he had never experienced a complete radio failure at such a critical moment, and the timing seemed too coincidental to be purely technical. Thunder sensed Jake's growing concern and shifted restlessly beneath him, the horse's natural instincts picking up on the tension that was building in the situation. Jake looked around for alternative options, considering whether to retreat to a location where he could get cell phone coverage or find a working radio. But as he began to guide Thunder backward, he noticed movement that changed everything. The individuals in the alley had spotted him, and their casual gathering had transformed into something much more purposeful. They were no longer simply occupying the space, but were actively positioning themselves in ways that suggested they had been expecting his arrival. The realization that this might not be a coincidental gathering hit Jake like a cold wave, and he understood that what had seemed like a routine call might be something far more serious and carefully planned than anyone had anticipated. The moment Jake realized he had been spotted, everything changed. What had been a quiet morning patrol suddenly transformed into something that felt like a carefully orchestrated trap. The individuals in the alley were no longer attempting to conceal their presence, and their movements had become coordinated in a way that suggested extensive planning and preparation. Jake's mind raced through his options as thunder shifted. Nervously beneath him, the horse's keen senses picking up on the escalating tension. Retreat seemed like the logical choice, but as Jake began to guide Thunder away from the immediate area, he noticed that additional figures had appeared at other strategic points around the alley system. They weren't making any overtly threatening moves, but their positioning effectively blocked the most direct escape routes. The radio failure now seemed far from coincidental. Jake tried his cell phone, but the device showed no signal strength, which was unusual for this area of town. Someone had gone to considerable trouble to isolate him from any means of calling for backup or assistance, and the level of preparation suggested that this was not a spontaneous event, but something that had been planned well in advance. Thunder's ears were constantly moving, tracking sounds and movements that Jake couldn't detect with his human senses. The horse was becoming increasingly agitated, not with fear, but with the kind of focused energy that came from recognizing a serious threat. Jake had seen this behavior before during training exercises, and he knew that Thunder was preparing for whatever might come next. A voice called out from the alley, clear enough for Jake to hear, but not loud enough to attract attention from anyone who might be in nearby buildings. "Officer Mitchell, we'd like to have a conversation with you. Why don't you come a little closer so we don't have to shout?" The fact that they knew his name sent a chill down Jake's spine. This was definitely not a random encounter or a case of being in the wrong place at the wrong time. Someone had specifically targeted him, and they had invested significant time and resources in creating this situation. The question was why and what they hoped to accomplish. Jake remained mounted on Thunder, using the horse's height to maintain a tactical advantage while assessing his situation. The individuals he could see were positioned to control his movement, but weren't displaying weapons openly. Their demeanor suggested confidence rather than desperation, which made them potentially more dangerous because it indicated they believed they had complete control of the situation. "I'm going to need to see some identification before we talk," Jake called back, keeping his voice steady and professional despite the adrenaline coursing through his system. "And I'll need you to move to a more open area where we can have a proper conversation." The response came quickly, and it wasn't what Jake had hoped to hear. "We're comfortable right where we are, Officer Mitchell, and we think you'll be more interested in what we have to say than in checking our identification. This is about something much more important than routine police business." Jake's training had prepared him for many scenarios, but this particular situation fell outside the normal parameters of law enforcement encounters. The individuals were being deliberately cryptic about their intentions, but their level of organization and the fact that they had his name suggested connections and resources that went beyond typical local troublemakers. Thunder suddenly tensed beneath him, and Jake felt the horse's muscles coil as if preparing to move quickly. The animal had detected something that hadn't yet registered with Jake's human senses, but before he could determine what had triggered Thunder's response, he heard the sound that explained everything. Multiple footsteps were approaching from behind, moving with the kind of synchronized precision that indicated military or law enforcement training. Jake turned in his saddle to see 3 more individuals emerging from concealed positions, effectively completing what was now clearly a planned encirclement. They had waited until he was focused on the group in the alley before revealing their true numbers and intentions. The tactical situation had deteriorated rapidly, but Jake forced himself to remain calm and analytical. These people had gone to extraordinary lengths to isolate and surround him, but they hadn't resorted to immediate violence or direct threats. That suggested they wanted something from him rather than simply wanting to harm him, which might provide opportunities for negotiation or escape. Thunder was now fully alert and ready for action, and Jake could feel the horse's eagerness to move. The animal's training included escape and evasion techniques, and Jake knew that Thunder was capable of creating chaos and confusion if the situation required it. But using those techniques would mean escalating the encounter into something unpredictable and potentially dangerous for everyone involved. The original voice from the alley spoke again, and this time the tone was more urgent. "Officer Mitchell, we really do need to talk. What we have to discuss affects more than just you. It concerns the entire community of Copper Valley, and time is becoming a factor." Jake made a decision that surprised even himself. Instead of attempting to flee or calling out for help, he guided Thunder a few steps closer to the alley entrance, close enough for normal conversation, but still far enough away to maintain some tactical advantage. Something in the speaker's tone had suggested genuine concern rather than malicious intent, and Jake's instincts told him that understanding their purpose might be more important than immediate escape. "All right," Jake said, keeping his hands visible and his voice calm. "I'm listening, but I need you to understand that my radio failure and your coordination here don't look like coincidence. If you want my cooperation, you're going to need to be straightforward about what you want." The response came from a different voice, this one belonging to a woman who stepped partially into view at the alley entrance. She was middle-aged, professionally dressed, and carried herself with the kind of confidence that came from authority and responsibility. Her appearance was completely inconsistent with Jake's expectations for this type of encounter. "Officer Mitchell, my name is Sarah Chen, and I represent a federal task force that has been investigating activities in this region for the past 8 months. We've been monitoring communications and movements that suggest Copper Valley is being used as a staging point for operations that could have serious consequences for public safety." Jake felt Thunder relax slightly beneath him as the conversation took on a more official tone, but he remained cautious. "If you're federal agents, why the elaborate setup? Why not contact the department through normal channels?" Sarah Chen stepped completely into view, and Jake could see that she was wearing a badge and had proper identification visible on her jacket. Her demeanor was professional but urgent, and her explanation addressed Jake's concerns directly. "Because our investigation has revealed that there may be compromise within local law enforcement agencies throughout this region. We don't know how extensive it is or who might be involved, but we needed to make contact with officers we've identified as reliable without risking exposure of our operation." The implications of what she was saying began to sink in, and Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. If there was corruption or compromise within local agencies, and if Copper Valley was being used for activities that threatened public safety, then his role as a community protector was about to become significantly more complicated. Thunder seemed to sense the shift in Jake's mental state and settled into a more relaxed posture while remaining alert to their surroundings. The horse's ability to read and respond to Jake's emotional state was one of the many reasons their partnership had been so effective over the years. Sarah Chen reached into her jacket and produced a leather credential holder, opening it to display both a federal badge and identification card. Even from his distance, Jake could see that the documentation appeared legitimate, with the kind of security features and official seals that would be difficult to counterfeit. Her colleagues remained positioned around the area, but had relaxed their stances slightly, suggesting that this phase of their operation was proceeding according to plan. "We've been tracking unusual patterns of activity throughout this region for months," Sarah continued. her voice carrying the weight of someone who had spent countless hours analyzing complex data. Financial transactions, communication intercepts, movement patterns, supply chain anomalies. Everything points to Copper Valley, being a critical hub in something much larger than local law enforcement agencies are equipped to handle. Jake dismounted from Thunder but kept the reins in his hand, allowing him to move more freely while maintaining his connection to his partner. The horse remained calm but alert, his trained senses continuing to monitor their surroundings for any changes in the situation. Thunder's presence provided Jake with both tactical advantages and emotional support as he processed the implications of what he was being told. "What kind of activities are we talking about?" Jake asked, his law enforcement training automatically focusing on gathering specific information rather than accepting vague generalities. "And why approach me specifically instead of working through established federal-local cooperation channels?" Sarah exchanged a quick glance with one of her colleagues before answering. "The activities involve resource diversion, supply chain, manipulation, and coordination networks that extend far beyond Arizona. As for why we approached you directly, our background investigation identified you as someone with an exemplary record, no financial irregularities, and a reputation for independence and integrity that makes compromise unlikely." The explanation was logical, but Jake's experience had taught him to be suspicious of situations that seemed too convenient or well orchestrated. The timing of his radio failure, the precise coordination of the contact, and the federal agent's detailed knowledge of his background and patrol routes suggested a level of surveillance and preparation that raised additional questions about their true purposes. Thunder suddenly lifted his head and turned toward the main street, his ears focused on something that Jake couldn't yet detect. The horse's alert posture indicated that someone or something was approaching their location, and Jake felt his own tension level increase as he prepared for whatever new development might be coming. Sarah noticed Thunder's reaction and immediately signaled to her colleagues, who quickly moved to positions that would keep them concealed from anyone approaching from the street. Their rapid coordination and tactical awareness suggested extensive training and experience in field operations, lending credibility to their claims of being federal agents. "We may have company," Sarah whispered to Jake. "Our surveillance indicated that certain individuals have been monitoring police patrol patterns and might respond to any deviation from routine. Your extended stop in this area could have triggered their attention." Jake felt a chill as he realized that he and Thunder might have inadvertently walked into something much more complex and dangerous than a simple federal contact. If there were indeed people monitoring police activities and responding to unusual patterns, then this entire encounter might have been observed and analyzed by hostile parties who could arrive at any moment. Thunder's agitation increased, and the horse began to shift his weight and paw the ground in a way that indicated his desire to move to a different location. Jake had learned to trust Thunder's instincts completely, and the animal's growing unease suggested that remaining in their current position was becoming inadvisable. "We need to relocate," Jake said quietly to Sarah. "My partner is detecting something that suggests we're about to have unwanted visitors. Do you have an alternative location where we can continue this conversation?" Sarah nodded and pointed toward a narrow pathway between two buildings that led away from both the alley system and the main street. "There's a maintenance area behind the old grain elevator that should provide better concealment and multiple exit routes. Can your horse handle rough terrain?" Jake almost smiled at the question. Thunder was a quarter horse bred and trained for exactly the kind of challenging terrain and demanding situations that they were now facing. The animal's strength, agility, and intelligence made him capable of handling virtually any environment they might encounter in the Copper Valley area. They began moving toward the pathway, with Sarah's colleagues maintaining their positions to provide security and early warning of any approaching threats. Jake led Thunder along the narrow passage, grateful for the horse's training and temperament that allowed them to navigate tight spaces without panic or resistance. As they moved deeper into the maze of service roads and maintenance areas behind the commercial district, Jake began to understand why this location had been chosen for the meeting. The area provided concealment from casual observation, while offering multiple routes for quick departure if the situation required it. The federal agents had clearly spent considerable time planning this encounter down to the smallest details. Thunder's ears swiveled constantly as they moved, tracking sounds and movements that helped Jake stay aware of their changing tactical situation. The horse's acute hearing and scent detection capabilities made him an invaluable early warning system, and Jake felt more confident knowing that Thunder would alert him to any approaching threats long before human senses could detect them. They reached the maintenance area behind the grain elevator, a space that was hidden from street view but provided good visibility in multiple directions. Sarah immediately began setting up what appeared to be portable communication equipment, while her colleagues took positions that provided security coverage for the area. "Officer Mitchell," Sarah said as she activated her equipment, "what I'm about to show you is classified information that could have serious implications for your safety and the safety of your community. Before I proceed, I need to know if you're prepared to commit to working with our investigation." Jake looked down at Thunder, who had settled into a relaxed but alert stance that indicated the horse felt more comfortable in their new location. The bond between them had been built on trust, mutual support, and shared commitment to protecting their community, and Jake knew that whatever decision he made would affect both of them. The weight of the moment was significant. Jake realized that his response to Sarah's question would likely determine not just his immediate future, but potentially the trajectory of his entire career and his relationship with the community he had sworn to protect. Thunder seemed to sense the importance of the decision and turned his head to look directly at Jake, as if offering silent support for whatever choice his partner might make. "Before I commit to anything," Jake said carefully, "I need to understand exactly what you're asking me to do and what risks might be involved for both me and my partner. Thunder isn't just police equipment. He's a living being who depends on me to make smart decisions about the situations we encounter." Sarah's expression softened slightly at Jake's concern for his horse, and she glanced at Thunder with what appeared to be genuine respect for the animal's role as more than just a tool of law enforcement. Her response suggested that she understood the unique nature of mounted patrol partnerships and the responsibilities that came with them. Sarah activated a tablet device that displayed a complex map of the Copper Valley region, marked with various symbols and data points that immediately captured Jake's attention. The level of detail was extraordinary, showing not just geographical features, but patterns of activity, timing sequences, and connection networks that painted a picture of sophisticated coordination extending far beyond what local law enforcement typically encountered. "What we've discovered," Sarah began, pointing to specific markers on the map, "is a network that's been using small towns like Copper Valley as testing grounds for social manipulation techniques. They identify communities with strong local institutions, respected law enforcement, and close-knit social structures, then gradually introduce elements designed to create distrust and division." Jake studied the map while Thunder moved closer. To him, the horse's natural curiosity making him interested in the electronic device that was capturing his partner's attention so completely. The data points showed patterns of activity that corresponded with events Jake remembered from recent months, incidents that had seemed unrelated at the time, but now appeared to be part of a coordinated campaign. Are you saying that some of the problems we've been dealing with locally aren't organic community issues? Jake asked, his understanding of recent events beginning to shift as he processed this new information. Exactly, Sarah confirmed. The goal appears to be undermining confidence in local institutions and law enforcement, creating conditions where outside intervention becomes necessary and welcome. It's a sophisticated approach to gaining influence and control in communities that would normally resist external manipulation. Thunder suddenly raised his head and turned toward the path they had used to reach their current location, his body language indicating that someone was approaching. Jake immediately moved to a position where he could see the pathway while remaining partially concealed behind the grain elevator structure. Sarah and her colleagues quickly secured their equipment and took defensive positions. What appeared around the corner was not what any of them had expected. Mrs. Elena Rodriguez, the elderly woman who had made the original call about suspicious activity, was walking carefully along the maintenance road, clearly looking for something or someone specific. Her presence in this location at this time seemed far too coincidental to be innocent. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Jake called out, stepping into view, but remaining alert to the possibility that her arrival was part of some larger development. "What brings you to this area? Is everything all right?" Elena's face showed a mixture of relief and anxiety as she spotted Jake. "Officer Mitchell, thank goodness. I've been trying to find you because something very strange has been happening in my building. Since I made that call this morning, people I don't recognize have been asking questions about you and your patrol routes, and they seem to know things about your schedule that worried me." Jake felt his stomach tighten as he realized that Elena might have inadvertently become involved in whatever operation was unfolding around them. Her reputation as an observant and reliable community member would make her both a valuable source of information and a potential target for anyone trying to monitor or manipulate local law enforcement activities. Sarah stepped forward and showed Elena her federal identification, speaking in a calm and reassuring tone. "Mrs. Rodriguez, I'm Agent Chen with the Federal Task Force. We're investigating activities that may affect community safety, and your observations could be very important to our work. Can you describe these individuals who were asking questions?" Elena's eyes widened as she processed the implications of federal agents operating in her neighborhood, but she quickly focused on providing the information that had prompted her to seek out Jake. They were professionally dressed, very polite, but they asked specific questions about Officer Mitchell's patrol patterns, his horse, and even about his personal background. They claimed to be conducting a community survey, but something about their questions felt wrong. Thunder moved closer to Elena, and she reached out to stroke his neck in a gesture that spoke to her comfort with the horse, despite the tense circumstances. The animal's calm response to her presence seemed to reassure everyone that she was not an immediate threat, though her information raised serious concerns about the scope of surveillance they might be facing. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Jake said gently, "I need you to think carefully about this. Did these individuals give you any contact information, business cards, or indication of what organization they represented? And did you notice any vehicles they might have been using?" Elena nodded and reached into her purse, producing a business card that she handed to Sarah. "They left this with me and asked me to call if I remembered. Anything else about police activities in the neighborhood? I didn't call because something felt off about the whole interaction." Sarah examined the card carefully, then showed it to Jake. The design was professional and included what appeared to be legitimate contact information for a research organization. But Jake noticed subtle elements that suggested the card might not be what it claimed to be. "This organization doesn't exist," Sarah said after consulting her tablet device. "The address is a mail drop. The phone number routes to an automated system, and the website was created less than 2 weeks ago. Someone went to considerable trouble to create a convincing but completely false identity." The implications began to cascade through Jake's mind as he realized that Elena's innocent call for police assistance this morning might have been part of a larger trap designed to isolate him and create opportunities for surveillance or manipulation. The timing of events, the radio failure, and now the appearance of individuals posing as researchers all suggested a level of coordination that was deeply troubling. Thunder suddenly tensed and turned toward a different direction, his ears focused on sounds coming from the area near the main street. Jake had learned to interpret the subtle differences in Thunder's alert behaviors, and this particular combination of body language indicated that multiple people were approaching their location, moving with purpose rather than casual wandering. "We have company again," Jake whispered to Sarah, "and based on my partner's reaction, it's probably more than one person moving in a coordinated fashion." Sarah immediately signaled to her colleagues, who responded by taking positions that would allow them to observe the approaches to their location while remaining concealed. Elena looked confused and frightened by the sudden increase in tension, and Jake moved to position himself between her and any potential threats. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Jake said quietly, "I need you to stay close to Thunder and me and do exactly what we tell you. It's possible that the people who visited you this morning have tracked you to this location, and we need to be prepared for any eventuality." Thunder's agitation continued to increase, and Jake could feel the horse's muscles coiling as the animal prepared for rapid movement. The bond between them had been built on thousands of hours of training and real-world experience, and Jake knew that Thunder's instincts were rarely wrong about approaching danger. Sarah activated her communication device and spoke in urgent, coded language to someone at a remote location. Her tone and the speed of her transmission suggested that the situation was developing in ways that required immediate backup or support from her organization. "Officer Mitchell," Sarah said as she concluded her transmission, "our surveillance teams have identified at least 6 individuals moving toward this location from different directions. Their movement patterns and coordination suggest professional training and hostile intent. We need to consider immediate extraction from this area." Jake looked at Elena, who was now clearly frightened but trying to remain calm, then at Thunder, who was ready for whatever action might be necessary. The decision he made in the next few moments would determine not just his own safety, but the safety of an innocent community member who had become caught up in something far beyond her understanding. The sound of footsteps and low voices was now audible to human ears, confirming Thunder's earlier warning that their location had been compromised. Jake realized that what had begun as a routine patrol call was about to become something that would test every aspect of his training, his partnership with Thunder, and his commitment to protecting the community he served. The approaching footsteps stopped just beyond the concealment provided by the grain elevator structure, and Jake could hear low voices engaged in what sounded like tactical coordination. Thunder's ears were constantly moving, tracking multiple sources of sound and movement that painted a picture of their situation becoming increasingly complex and potentially dangerous. Sarah's colleagues had positioned themselves to provide early warning and defensive coverage, but their hand signals indicated that they were significantly outnumbered by whoever was approaching their location. Elena remained close to Jake and Thunder, her fear evident but controlled as she seemed to understand the seriousness of their situation. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Jake whispered, "can you ride? We may need to move quickly, and Thunder can carry both of us if necessary." Elena nodded, though her expression showed uncertainty about her ability to mount and ride a police horse under these circumstances. Thunder seemed to sense her anxiety and moved closer to her, lowering his head slightly in a gesture that Jake recognized as the horse's way of offering reassurance to someone who was frightened. A voice called out from beyond their concealment, clear and authoritative. "Agent Chen, Officer Mitchell, we know you're in the maintenance area. We'd like to resolve this situation through conversation rather than confrontation. We represent interests that extend far beyond what you currently understand." Sarah exchanged a quick glance with Jake, her expression showing both concern and calculation as she processed the implications of being identified by name and location. The fact that these individuals knew exactly who was present and where they were located suggested surveillance capabilities and information sources that went well beyond normal civilian resources. "Who are you and what do you want?" Sarah called back, positioning herself to use the grain elevator structure as cover while maintaining the ability to communicate. The response came from a different voice, this one belonging to someone who was clearly accustomed to authority and negotiation. "We represent a consortium of interests that has been monitoring federal activities in this region. Agent Chen, your task force has been investigating activities that are actually part of a much larger and more complex situation than your briefings indicated." Jake felt thunder tense beneath him as the horse detected movement in multiple directions around their position. The animal's acute senses were tracking developments that human perception couldn't follow, and Jake knew that their tactical situation was continuing to deteriorate even as the conversation proceeded. "What situation?" Jake called out, his law enforcement training automatically seeking to gather information while buying time to assess their options. "The activities your federal friends have been investigating aren't what they appear to be," the authoritative voice replied. "What they've identified as a network designed to undermine local institutions is actually a testing program for community resilience and response capabilities. Copper Valley was selected as a pilot location for evaluating how communities respond to various forms of social and institutional stress." The revelation hit Jake like a physical blow as he began to understand the implications of what was being suggested. If the voice was telling the truth, then everything he had been told about protecting his community from external manipulation might itself be part of a larger manipulation designed to test how law enforcement and community members would respond to perceived threats. Elena looked confused and frightened as she tried to follow the conversation, but Jake could see understanding beginning to dawn in her eyes as she realized that her morning call to police might have triggered a chain of events that went far beyond anything she could have imagined. Sarah's response was immediate and sharp. "That's impossible. Our investigation has been ongoing for 8 months, with multiple sources of verification and oversight. What you're describing would require resources and authorization levels that don't exist outside of specific federal programs." "Agent Chen," the voice replied with what sounded like genuine patience, "your investigation has been carefully guided and managed to produce exactly the conclusions you reached. The patterns you identified, the data points you collected, even the background investigation that led you to Officer Mitchell, all of it was designed to create a scenario that would test community response to federal intervention in local affairs." Thunder suddenly raised his head and looked directly at Jake, the horse's eyes showing an alertness and intelligence that seemed almost human in its intensity. In that moment, Jake felt a connection with his partner that transcended their normal communication, as if Thunder was trying to convey something important about their situation that couldn't be expressed through normal behavioral signals. Jake's mind raced through the events of the morning, analyzing them from this new perspective. The radio failure, the precise timing of the federal contact, Eleanor's perfectly timed arrival at the maintenance area. even Thunder's behavioral responses, all of it could be interpreted as part of an elaborate scenario designed to test his decision-making and response patterns. But as Jake looked at Elena's genuine fear and confusion, at Thunder's authentic animal responses to real threats, and at Sarah's obvious surprise and concern at what was being revealed, he began to doubt the explanation being offered by their unseen observers. "If what you're saying is true," Jake called out, "then you should have no problem identifying yourselves and explaining exactly who authorized this testing program and what its real purposes are." The response came after a pause that suggested consultation among the hidden observers. "Officer Mitchell, the authorization for this program comes from levels of government that local law enforcement isn't normally briefed about. What's important for you to understand is that your responses today will influence how similar programs are implemented in other communities across the country." Thunder's agitation reached a new level, and the horse began to move restlessly, his body language indicating an urgent desire to leave their current location. Jake had learned to trust Thunder's instincts completely, and the animal's increasing distress suggested that remaining in place was becoming dangerous, regardless of the explanations being offered. Sarah activated her communication device again, speaking in rapid coded language that Jake couldn't follow, but that clearly involved requesting immediate assistance or extraction. Her tone suggested that she was no longer certain about the true nature of their situation, but was preparing for multiple contingencies. Elena suddenly grabbed Jake's arm, her voice urgent but quiet. "Officer Mitchell, I recognize one of those voices. It belongs to someone who visited my building 3 days ago, asking questions about you and your patrol routes. He claimed to be from the city planning department, but I never believed that story." The revelation that Elena had encountered at least one of their current observers days before the morning's events began to collapse the explanation about spontaneous testing programs. Jake realized that whatever was happening had been planned and coordinated over an extended period, involving detailed surveillance and preparation that went far beyond any legitimate research or testing scenario. Thunder's ears suddenly swiveled toward a new direction, and Jake heard the distant but unmistakable sound of helicopter rotors approaching their location. The aircraft was still far enough away that its purpose was unclear, but its arrival added yet another variable to an already complex and dangerous situation. "Agent Chen," Jake said quietly, "I think we're about to find out who's really in charge of this situation. That helicopter could be your backup, their support, or something else entirely, but based on my partner's behavior, we need to be ready for anything." The helicopter sound grew steadily louder, and Jake could see Thunder's muscles coiling with the tension that came from the animal's natural wariness of aircraft. However, instead of the flight pattern Jake expected from either tactical support or surveillance operations, the helicopter seemed to be circling the area in a search pattern, as if looking for something specific rather than providing direct support to either group. Sarah's communication device crackled with incoming transmission, and her expression changed from concern to surprise as she listened to the message. "That helicopter belongs to the real federal task force," she announced. "The one I thought I was part of until about 30 minutes ago." Jake felt a chill as the implications of her statement became clear. "Are you saying that you're not actually a federal agent?" "I'm saying that I thought I was a federal agent until this morning's events started unfolding in ways that didn't match my briefings or training," Sarah replied, her voice carrying a mixture of confusion and dawning realization. "The task force I thought I was working for, the investigation I thought I was conducting, the background checks and surveillance capabilities I thought I had access to, none of it matches what's actually happening here." Elena looked between Jake and Sarah, with growing understanding, so all of you have been manipulated. The people who questioned me, the federal agents, even Officer Mitchell's patrol route today. Thunder suddenly wheeled around to face a new direction, his attention focused on movement that was approaching from the path leading back toward the main street. But instead of the coordinated approach of hostile individuals, what appeared was a group of people that Jake recognized from the community, including Mayor Patricia Williams, Sheriff Tom Bradley, and several other local officials. The sight of familiar faces from his own community leadership arriving at this remote location added another layer of complexity to an already bewildering situation. Jake guided Thunder toward the approaching group, while maintaining awareness of the unseen observers who had been speaking to them from concealment. "Jake," Sheriff Bradley called out as they approached, "we've been trying to reach you all morning. Your radio failure was reported by dispatch, but when we sent units to your last known location, they found evidence of surveillance equipment and coordination activities that triggered federal attention." Mayor Williams stepped forward, her expression showing the kind of concern that came from understanding that her community was facing something unprecedented. "Officer Mitchell, we've learned that Copper Valley has been the subject of what appears to be an unauthorized social research program involving multiple groups with different agendas and conflicting information about their authority and purposes." Jake felt Thunder relax slightly as the horse recognized the familiar scents and voices of people from their community, but the animal remained alert to the ongoing presence of unknown individuals in the area. The bond between Jake and Thunder had always been based on mutual trust and protection, and that foundation remained solid even as everything else about their situation continued to shift and evolve. Sarah approached the group of local officials, showing her identification and beginning to explain her role in the morning's events. As she spoke, Jake began to understand that multiple layers of deception and manipulation had been operating simultaneously, each group believing they were part of legitimate operations while actually being subjects or participants in something much larger and more complex. The helicopter had landed in a clearing visible from their location, and Jake could see individuals in standard federal agent attire approaching their position. Their arrival promised answers to questions that had been building throughout the morning, but Jake realized that the most important revelations had already occurred through his interactions with his community and his partnership with Thunder. Elena moved closer to Thunder and reached out to stroke the horse's neck, her gesture reflecting the comfort and reassurance she had found in the animal's calm presence during a morning filled with confusion and uncertainty. Thunder responded to her touch with the kind of gentle acceptance that had made him such an effective community policing partner, providing stability and reassurance to people in stressful situations. "Mrs. Rodriguez," Jake said gently, "your call this morning may have been prompted by people who were manipulating the situation, but your instincts about something being wrong were absolutely correct. Your willingness to reach out for help and then to seek me out when you had additional concerns probably prevented something much more serious from developing." The real federal agents reached their group and immediately began the process of sorting through the complex web of activities that had been unfolding in Copper Valley. Their questions and documentation procedures revealed that multiple research organizations, private security firms, and academic institutions had been operating in the area under various pretenses, each believing they had appropriate authorization for their activities. As the official investigation proceeded, Jake began to understand that he and Thunder had been selected as subjects not because of any compromise or corruption in local law enforcement, But because their partnership and community reputation made them ideal test subjects for evaluating how trusted law enforcement officers would respond to complex and ambiguous threats. Thunder's role in the morning's events had been more significant than Jake initially realized. The horse's acute senses and trained responses had provided early warning and tactical advantages that had prevented the situation from escalating into something genuinely dangerous. More importantly, Thunder's presence had provided emotional support and stability that had helped everyone involved make better decisions under pressure. Sheriff Bradley approached Jake as the federal agents continued their work. "Jake, I want you to know that your handling of this situation reflects everything we value about community policing and the partnership between officers and the people we serve. Your priority throughout this entire incident has been protecting community members and making decisions based on genuine concern for public safety." Mayor Williams added, "The bond between you and Thunder and the way you've used that partnership to serve our community is exactly why Copper Valley's mounted patrol program has been so successful. This morning's events, whatever their original purpose might have been, demonstrated the value of having officers who are truly connected to both their partners and their community." As the afternoon progressed and the various investigations were completed, Jake found himself reflecting on the lessons learned from the morning's extraordinary events. The manipulation and deception they had encountered had been sophisticated and multi-layered, but the fundamentals of good policing, genuine partnership, and community service had remained constant throughout. Thunder seemed to sense that the crisis had passed and had gradually returned to his normal, relaxed but alert demeanor. The horse's ability to read and respond to changing situations had been crucial to navigating the morning's challenges, but more importantly, his presence had provided a constant reminder of the simple, honest values that formed the foundation of effective law enforcement. Elena approached Jake as he prepared to return Thunder to the stables for the routine care and attention that ended every patrol shift. "Officer Mitchell, I learned something important today about trusting my instincts and about the value of having police officers who are truly part of the community they serve. Thank you for protecting me and for showing me what real partnership looks like." As Jake mounted Thunder for the ride back to headquarters, he realized that the morning's events had reinforced rather than undermined his confidence in the fundamental principles of community policing. The attempts to manipulate and test their responses had actually demonstrated the strength that came from genuine relationships, honest communication, and partnerships based on mutual trust and shared commitment to service. Thunder's stride was strong and confident as they rode through the streets of Copper Valley, past the businesses and homes of people who depended on them for protection and service. The bond between officer and horse, forged through years of training and real-world experience, had proven resilient in the face of deception and manipulation, emerging stronger for having been tested under the most challenging circumstances. The sun was beginning to set over the desert landscape as Jake and Thunder completed their patrol, a day that had begun with routine expectations but had evolved into something that would be remembered and analyzed for years to come. Most importantly, it had been a day that demonstrated the enduring value of partnerships built on trust, training, and genuine commitment to protecting and serving the community they both loved. Jake looked down at Thunder's strong neck and running Minnie, feeling grateful for a partner whose loyalty and instincts had helped guide them through one of the most complex challenges they had ever faced together. Tomorrow would bring another patrol, another opportunity to serve their community, and another chance to strengthen the bond that made their partnership so effective and meaningful. The story of Jake and Thunder's extraordinary day had become more than just an account of law enforcement response to an unusual situation. It had become a testament to the power of authentic partnerships, community trust, and the simple but profound values that make the difference between mere security and genuine protection. As they approached the stables where Thunder would receive the care and attention he deserved after their remarkable day, Jake knew that their story would continue tomorrow and for many years to come, built on the same foundation of trust, service, and unwavering commitment to each other and to the community that depended on them both. Dear listeners, we hope that Jake and Thunder's incredible journey has moved you as much as it moved us while bringing this story to life. Their partnership shows us the power of trust, loyalty, and dedication in protecting our communities. To continue experiencing stories that explore the deep bonds between partners and the courage required to serve others, we've prepared a special playlist with equally captivating tales waiting for you. You can find it right here by clicking to your left. If this story of partnership and bravery touched your heart, please don't forget to subscribe to our channel and give this video a thumbs up. Every day we bring you unique stories that celebrate the complexity and beauty of human connections and the unbreakable bonds we form with our most trusted companions. Don't miss our upcoming content, and we look forward to seeing you in the comments sharing your thoughts about Jake and Thunder's adventure.